Today, we hear a very important point in the gospel of the importance of names, of the importance of impressions. And as anyone who's ever applied for a job or gone on a date or whatever it might have been knows the importance of a first impression. Because in those few moments, which we'll get to, we are able to form judgments about people. We're able to slightly give a glimpse of what that person is really like. And what people don't know, which is a fun fact, is that the average impression is made within 7 seconds. We have 7 seconds to make a first impression for anyone who's in front of us. And in an article recently on, I believe it was Business Insider, they wrote a whole article about how at job interviews and so on, they're able to distinguish whether or not that person is worthwhile working in their company within a minute. Their whole entire career is based off of 1 minute of their job interview. And they wrote how people essentially fail their job interviews, but not necessarily that, but fail their first impressions. And they say the number one thing is people fake who they really are. They don't really show their true colors. The second is that no one prepares, not many prepare for the moment of a first impression, if, of course, the time allows for it. 3 is their body language. Tells a lot about themselves, and most people, if they're intimidated, you can tell who's scared and who's nervous and what is possibly going through their minds during these interviews. And 4, of course, is they're not dressed properly. They don't necessarily look as much as they should, especially if they're applying for a job. So within the 7 to 10 seconds on average that we have, what do we get? We get to show the person who we are, but how do you do that? Through your looks? That's a little superficial. But really all we have is what is your name and how you present yourself at that moment. And in today's gospel, we almost see a very similar situation. We hear Christ ask, "What is your name?" The person in today's gospel was possessed by many demons. And we hear that he uses the name Legion. And even though Christ, being God, knows everything, he at that moment makes his impression and knows that he has to have some type of interaction with this man at this perfect moment. And through our minds, as we look at it now, speaking of the importance of identities and our names, what is this man's true identity? What we seem to forget is that we are a creation of God. What we seem to forget is that we have more than just the labels that we're given in today's society. And more time than ever, we are called by society to label ourselves, no matter what it is, whether it's through our careers, our jobs, who we are, what we look like, whatever it might be. The gospel lesson today is calling us to an alternative, is calling us to reach out to our innermost self and look and see who we are and give an impression to others. We are called to think of all of the times we might have failed in our lives and not let them overcome us as the man in today's gospel, which allowed for those demons to enter him. And I remember reading from and watching a video, of course, of my old preaching professor, Father Luke Veronis. He gave 4 amazing instances of how we fail to use our Christian impression onto people. Just like how we have our business impression of how we do at our jobs, there's a similar way within our lives. And he says that we prevent people from seeing who we are truly. And we put a fake persona, a mask, that we want for people to believe who we are. And sometimes, truthfully, it is who we are, but only one side of it. maybe only the good side. We don't want to show people our bad side, I guess, just yet on a first impression. Maybe that takes time. But it's an opportunity for them to get to see who we are as a whole. We only portray that one aspect. And of course, the connection to that in today's time is that on social media, we post only the pictures that we want to post. The ones that make us look good. You know, you see all the people doing the selfies, the this, the that, and it only shows one aspect of who they are. Not necessarily, no one's taking a picture when they first wake up in the morning with their hair all over the place, or with the ladies without makeup on, whatever it is. We should, why not? That's who we are, right? But no one ever does that. Of course not. Another trap that we have is to confuse people of the alternative, actually, that we are good inside. But for some reason in today's society, bad is good. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. I'll let you know when I figure out why that makes sense these days. But we portray ourselves as bad people because that might make us cool, or that might make us likable in some way, shape, or form. Again, it makes very little sense, but it is there. And lastly is the fear. We fear sharing our weaknesses. We're great at sharing our strengths. There's no doubt about that. But we fear sharing our weaknesses, our temptations, our bad habits, our opinions, depending on what they are. We see a side of ourselves that we don't want other people to see. And there's an additional level to this trap, which I'm going to use his exact words. Unfortunately, even with ourselves, we are not always honest. Many times we think better or worse of ourselves than we actually are. And we even deceive ourselves into believing these almost false images. And such people never travel into their soul's depths to discover what is actually there. We have to start accepting the challenge of sharing who we are as Orthodox Christians, and not being ashamed about it, or not having to worry about what people might think of us for calling us Orthodox Christians, or for being Orthodox Christians. Because within our struggle of life, which we have to embrace, of course, is God. And at the end of the day, God knows who we truly are underneath. No matter how far down we might be, just like the man in today's gospel where we hear he was overtaken by demons. He even gave him the moment to release him of those things, even in his darkest times. And even in our greatest times, God knows who we truly are. And when we struggle, whatever our weaknesses are, we're able to overcome them, because for every weakness we might have, there's some type of strength. No matter if we might have it or not, we can work on that. That's our ability as human beings. So if we have a problem with pride, God gives us humility. If we have an anger issue for whatever reason, God gives us love. He gives us that alternative to combat the passions of our life so that we can make the choice, so that when we have our free will and the choices to be made, we can make them and we can become closer to God. These are the challenges that he gives us in today's society. So when Jesus asks the man in today's gospel, "What is your name?" we can also include the questions, "Who are you? How do you see yourself?" Because the man could only acknowledge the evil that was within him and not the good. He was so lost that even he thought he couldn't overcome his demons, and he was standing before Christ. He was standing before God. But we're given the opportunity to see in today's gospel that God's power is beyond understanding, and that even the legion of demons, which is a very large amount in military terms, very large amount, even the one man God, Christ, standing in front of him, he almost still didn't have hope. And it wasn't until he told them to go out and gave them leave and to enter into the swine. We have to take these next steps in our spiritual journeys and allow for us to acknowledge the difficulties and struggles of our life to acknowledge that we will do wrong. However, we can combat that with doing right. And the more right we do, the more good things that we do, the more things that bring us closer to God, likewise, the less things that take us away from God. And it's a courageous step that we're taking today because we're identifying who we are as people, as Orthodox Christians, as God's creation, and furthering our relationship. And that takes courage. So be courageous, and may you have a blessed week and good strength.